Hello, in this video I'll cover how to use Yarnspinner to create a dialogue system in your Unity game. So supposedly you have followed the text guide in downloading the sample project and read about how to install Yarn. So we'll start with installing Yarn through Package Manager. To do that, you'll need to download the package through a Git link. Suppose you're using 2019.3 or later, we do strongly suggest using that instead of the previous versions for a more stable interface. So we'll use this Git link. Please be careful to not include the last dot. It's going to break things. Here we'll be adding from git URL add, and then it's going to start downloading. Downloading might take a bit because Yarnspinner is not a small library. Good. So now we have all the components installed in Unity. We can start working on the scene. Just let it import for a while. Yep. So right now you can see Yarnspinner is in Secret Lab option because it's not provided by Unity Technologies. Now go to this scene called blank scene. It's in scenes, blank scene. And right now what it does is it has a empty, so to speak, Dialog Ui and a moving character controller using rigid body and also camera movement. These things will not be the topic of this tutorial. And here, if you go use WSAD to move the characters around, if you go to the green box, it's not going to do anything because we don't have that yet. So if you go to Mpc 1 and go to its script, you can see something like this. Here you can see there is a talk to option function, which is exactly, if you find all the references, it's exactly called in the player controller when player press spacebar and when the NPC is nearby. So knowing that, basically what we do will be setting up things so we can implement this talk to and make things work. And if you see here, many of the code are indeed commented out because just to make things easier to follow. So now let's go back to the scene, and the first thing we'll do is pulling the Yarnspinner components into our scene. And now find something and let's name it Yarn component. And in here we should be able to, when you input dialog, you include the UE at the end because that's kind of important. We can see dialog runner and dialog UI. We need both of them. So in general, dialog runner is what controls the state machine of a node structure. So every script, if you know this in a visual novel or any game that has branching dialogue, every script, or like the story script, is a tree of nodes, and it can be run as a state machine where every node is indeed a state. So here you can see on node start, on node complete, and on dialog complete is exactly 3 time points in the state machine that allows you to program things. And everything here, at least the previous two, has a string indicating which node it is. Every node is marked by a unique string. So we'll not be using these things yet, but just it's good to keep in mind that it can be useful. And here for language, it's important that you type in English for this tutorial. We'll not cover localization here, and the default language of Yarnspinner editor is English. So by default, whatever you create is in English. You need to type it in exactly. We'll cover how to change the language settings later when we are actually writing the Yarn code. And for variable storage, we actually need something called in-memory variable storage. This memory storage thing will not be covered in this tutorial as well, because it's not useful at all if you do not know how to serialize things into the disk. So for now, just know that you can set global variables in the Yarn script and read them. So say you want to make something like The Witcher, and you want to have the later story reflect on a previous decision made by the player. Say you want Kira Mates to die if the player didn't make it to convince her not to go to the Boy King. I forgot his name. In that case, you might want to set a variable after the event of Kira Mates, because that's not going to branch the story, so to speak. The story always goes to the next chapter, whatever you did to Kira Mates, but it's going to have a long-lasting effect. That's when you use variables. The syntax, both in Yarn and in C# for using this, is a little bit tricky, and it's going to take a lot of time explaining, so I will just skip it for this. You can find all the information about it on the website. So for now, drag this in variable storage and drag it to Dialog Ui. This Dialog Ui is referring to this UI script, because Dialog Runner will be taking the direct command, so to speak, from the framework, and it's going to control the UI and the memory variable storage. And here, start node. We'll change this later. It's actually in this demo is not going to be useful at all. We'll use the dynamic way to set the start node. And for start automatically, be sure to check it off, because we don't want to start automatically. This is not a visual novel or something. This is more like an RPG game where you have dialogues. It's like Visual 3 if you think about it. Now for Dialog UI, if you are familiar with what's in the blank scene, you can see there is a canvas, and the only thing in canvas is a container Dialog UI, which sadly has the same name because that's the only thing that makes sense. And inside the Dialog UI is exactly a picture and line and 4 buttons. So for now, the first thing to do is drag this thing as dialog container, because it's indeed the container for dialog components. And text speed determines how fast the characters are spitted out. So we don't really care about it. You can put it really fast or really slow if you want, like different types of speed, and also you can change it dynamically to have different people say different pace, basically. And here, option buttons is where it gets interesting. We'll lock it here because we'll do something different. Here you can see the 4 buttons under choice buttons are also I used a vertical layout group to make it look this like pretty. So we'll drag those into option buttons. What it does is that option buttons are the things to display the actual options you have when you want the player to have a choice of saying A or saying B. Is going to be displayed in the button. And also if you look at the type, it's always going to be button. So you have to wrap something in a button. You can change the pictures though, so it's not really a big deal, but you have to drag a button into this, and when there's no option showing up, Dialog UI will turn it off. We'll turn all of them up, and when there are 1 to 4 choices, Dialog UI will take from these and use it as a container. And be aware of the number. There are only 4 buttons, which means if you put more than 4, say 5 or 6 choices in one of the nodes, it's going to break things. And also, Dialog UI doesn't control the layout. That's why you need a layout group here. There is a vertical layout group for choice buttons. So it means you can literally do whatever you want for the layout. Now go to the next thing is on dialog start, on dialog end. So these are, and also there are a bunch of delegations or Unity events here. These are all the important time points during the dialog's lifespan. So it's dialog start, dialog end. Line start means before the line starts, and line finish displaying is when it will be called every time a line is going to be swapped out, either turn off or to the next one. Online update is when a line is fed in. So this thing actually is used to actually show the line. So Dialog UI doesn't know which component holds the text. You need to put a function or method here to take the input and process it using custom logic. And then on line end, on option start, on option end, this is when options showing up. So if you have a line saying full bar, and then the next thing is choice, and the next thing is choice. After the full bar, you press continue. It's going to be in triggering option start, and then after you choose something before it goes to the next line, it's going to trigger option end. And on command is when a command happens. It takes a string, so this one is going to feed in the whole string of command before it actually triggers the command workflow, which will be covered later. And now in-memory variable storage, we just said it's not important here. So for now, we'll just add dialog start and dialog end. We'll turn off player controller and turn it back on respectively. So here we'll find player controller be enabled, yes, it's off, and then enabled, yes. Save. And now what will happen is that whenever the dialog starts, player will not be able to move, which is usually what happens in the game. You can also don't have this, so you can move around when dialog starts, which is also very valid for different types of games. Now the next thing is, so the next part will be covering how to write dialogue in Yarn. We'll be starting with the very basic one, and in a later section when we cover commands, we'll be adding commands to the script to make it more smart. So here, double click on the node. For some reason it's sticking to my mouth. I think there's something with their JavaScript front end, which sucks. Let's rename this node mpc1.start. The reason for not naming it start is because when you load multiple documents into Yarn, they are going to share a same scope for node naming. So all node names are global throughout the whole game. So you don't want to have multiple scripts for different NPCs to have the same start button. So we'll start with this mpc1.start because there will be only one mpc1 here. And tags, we don't need to use tags here, but it's helpful to know that every node has a start. You can access nodes through either Dialog Runner or Dialog UI, but we'll not cover that here. Now go ahead in here and write something like mpc1 column hello, means mpc1 says something. And then there are two ways of branching a node. The first one is using arrows. So when you're using arrows, you're more likely creating a branch under you're creating a branch node, but it's squished into this node, and it has very weak flexibility, so to speak. You can only do so many things in this node, but we'll cover here. You can say hello back, and mpc1 says see ya, and or say nothing, and mpc1 says huh, right? So this is then mpc1 will say see ya again, because we don't care about the semantics here. Now this is a quick way if you want something that's trivial to happen, but give the player a little feeling about like actually making these moves, but more useful way and more intuitive ways to branch the nodes. So we'll keep the first one, mpc says hello, but then we'll be doing this. Click this square bracket twice, this means it turns green. So this is what we do with branching. So now type this. You can see the text on the left is black, but the one on the right is green. So what happens here is that greet is going to be displayed as one of the clickable buttons on screen, but greeted is a no name, and we'll see that in just a bit. And the second option is to say nothing, which is being rude. Always say something when someone is asking you questions or greeting you. Now, if we go back, you can see it's having to. How do I? This is weird. I didn't encounter this before. Let's just bear with it. Now, there are two new nodes greeted and being rude, which corresponds to what we have in the first node, if you noticed. So this is how you branch a node in the editor. You can also edit this in VS Code using using its text editor, which sucks in many ways. So now, if you go to greeted, it's not letting me do so. Weird. Yeah, I'll skip this part because you'll have a full copy of the dialog in the repo. So just to be sure, we really just want to talk about how to branch nodes here. So yeah, this is how a branch node. We'll use a very simple one in this tutorial, and all that matters right now is just to have the nodes branch. So that concludes this part. The next part of this tutorial will cover how to write a dialog controller. So everything from here will involve code, and this is just my preference of designing things. You don't have to design a dialog system as I do, but because I do use singleton a lot, it's going to speed things up, but it's not the best way you can program things. It's not really the best practice in any kind of programming. So for now, before we do any code, we actually need to download the file. I already have the file in the repo, so I don't have to download it. But just to demonstrate, you go to File, and then you choose Save as Yarn. Click that, and it's going to download. As simple as that. You have to drag it into Unity and rename it to, you have to rename things. Now, if we go back to Unity, the dialog's already here. Use version 2 probably, or okay, you can use version 1. Make no difference. And version 1 has this. It's using the old way, but we don't really care about it right now. So just remember, you can do it the other way. It's not going to make any difference until you have more advanced things like variable or commanding them. So for some reason, Yarn hates me and doesn't allow me to save, or doesn't allow me to edit these files. Okay, so this is what it looks like. This is exactly what shows up in a node. So a node starts with something like this, which is what you saw on the editor, and then dash dash dash, and then equal equal equal. And yeah, if everything, also when you're importing a Yarn script, if everything is syntactical, it's going to show up like this instead of like normal Yarn normal text file, which if you drag a normal text file into Unity, it's going to be recognized as a text asset and be packed into the assets. But Yarn has a separate way of doing that. So if you see the script show up, the green button means it's right. Otherwise, it means you have syntactic issues, and you have to go to console to actually see what are the issues. So here we're fine. And next step is to create a controller class. In the demo, I'm going to name it text field just because it sounds pretty good. But feel free to name it whatever, and probably find a more descriptive way of saying that. Now, if you look at this class, which is text field, already has stuff in there. So I'll just start and explaining things. The first thing is includes. These things are always useful. Always keep them in there. And there's a class called text field. Compile? Does it compile? I think compiles. Yes. The includes here Yarn Unity is always required for anything that works with Yarn. Otherwise, you don't have access to Dialog Runner, which is very important. You'll know that later on. For now, for the PFP things, just comment it out. We're not covering these yet. And okay, so the first two things are two serialized fields. You're going to drag those in from the editor. First one is text. So as I mentioned before, Yarn doesn't know where to put the text. You have to have a custom logic. So this thing will be the container for our line text basically. And Dialog Runner is the runner object. We'll use that a lot. Now in Dialog is a Boolean. It's going to be marked on and off as Dialog is marked on and off. We'll be adding that to Dialog Ui's delegation later, and it's going to be useful when we are doing continues, because you'll see the reason later. Now for publics, the public static text field instance equals null, and the wake are the singleton interface. I won't be going in depth here, but just whenever you have a class, write these things in, makes it in singleton. It's going to be it's not persistent though across all the things. Be aware of that. Just to be sure, to be very safe, add this in the class. Don't destroy unload game object. Therefore, when the scene goes from scene 1 to scene 2, this thing will stay in if it's in scene 1. So right now this is a valid Unity style singleton. You can also write something fancy. I saw someone using a parent class singleton and then has angle brackets. I didn't do that. Now the start part is okay. Ignore the add command handler first, because we're not doing command yet. Now go to update. So you can see here in Dialog and input get key down space. I'm hard coding this. Do not hard code anything in your game, but this is a demo, so I just hard coded it. So there are two things. In Dialog means if Dialog Ui tells this thing, it's right now Dialog's running. The second thing is the user press space. It'll call runner. Remember that's a Dialog runner. Dot dialog, which is the dialog that's currently on, and dot continue. This is exactly how you get from the previous line to the next line. I don't know why it doesn't have a more convenient way in the editor to set this up, but this is the way I found, and it's working. Now show line is going to be called by Dialog UI. It's going to actually quote unquote show the line. This is the logic to display the line, and it's very simple. It's just text.text. Remember, text is a text field, and text is its field. If you do not know how to work with TMP, you just need to know for a TMP UGUI, the text part is where it contains the currently displaying text. Next one, register speaker. This will be called by the Mpc, which will be modified later, and PFP is for command part. And ignore these as well. So these things are not useful here. So basically, every Mpc will find this object, which is why I made it a singleton. A singleton can be accessed anywhere under the same or a different namespace, and they're going to register themselves with a script. So in this design, every Mpc holds their own script. I think it kind of makes sense if you have a small RPG game or maybe side scroller, and it's going to call runner.add script. This tells runner load the script in the system, and when we're looking for a node to start, this script can be searched. Otherwise, even if you have the asset in there, runner doesn't know about it. Runner doesn't search, and if you say you have script A that has a start node, start -1, and you look for that, but the script is not added, it's failing. So yeah, pretty simple. Now start dialog is also called by by the Mpc. This is exactly what we're going to do with talk to in the Mpc script. So here, the non-player script, there's a talk to. We'll be using this method. And about Mpc script, there's one important thing is that you see it's telling the text field to start a node with starting node, which is set here. Set this in the editor before you start game. So it's a convenient way to doing that. You can also hard code it or something. Not important here. The start node though, which is a string literal, is going to be fed into runner, and runner will search this node as it appears in here. So this node is called mpc1.start, and when you start, the node name should be mpc1.start. And if you have the Mpc script loaded added and the right node name, it's going to start from that exact node and its first line. Also, Yarn doesn't remember, so to speak, the progress in the node. So if you say you want to start from a certain line of node, there isn't a very easy way to do that. Comment this out. Whoops. Don't see this first. These are the handler for commands, which will be covered in the last part. So for now, this is a working controller. It's really just something that you can work with from distance. If you don't want this like independence, like you don't want Mpc to have their own scripts or something, you don't need this class. This is just for make life easier for designers probably. Now we go back to player, and here, non-player. It needs to do two things on start. First, two things, not on start. The first thing is on start is going to register itself. Also, remember there's a script here. So first thing, we add in the script. So we can drag a script in from the editor and set it to the script, and it's going to register this script to the text field or the controller on start. And when it's interacted or talked to, it's going to tell the text field start my dialog node. So the reason why we don't need to, like, when we register, we don't have to register a name yet is because scripts don't have names. Script names are not important. When you add multiple scripts, they're kind of mashed into the same script, but they have different trees. So what's important is starting node, and starting node is set from the editor, which is cool. So this, I think that's the only parts we need to do in the non-player. And now if we go to mpc1, we need to set some things. First is mpc1.start. This is actually correct. It's already preset. I didn't clear that out. Log, and if you go to dialogs, mpc1, drag that in. Save. Now the MPC knows its starting node, knows its file. It's going to register with, okay, important thing, add the controller in. If you don't add that in, it's not going to have anything for the singleton. Also, text box here, and runner is the self. Now if you play the game, there's nothing here because Dialog Ui actually kicks in and turns off the dialog when dialog is not running. And if you approach and play space, well, that's weird. Okay, we'll be fixing that later. Okay, so I just figured out what happened just now. So in Dialog Ui, we need a couple of more delegations, which is bad, I forgot about them. The first one is that in the dialog start and end, we need to tell the yarn component or the text field that dialog is starting or ending. So here we just finding the text field and in dialog, and here we turn it off again. And the second thing is on line update. This is very important. Yarn doesn't know where to put the line, so it gives the decision to the user. So which is exactly why we need a show line. So if you drag the same thing in here and find its component text field, go all the way up to until you see something dynamic string. This is what we want. Do not use static parameters because that's not useful. For dynamic string, choose show line, which is what we wrote. You can name it whatever you want, just make it consistent. And now if you go start game, you can see you can still work around, but dialog is not showing up as explained before. Dialog UI is kicking in and turning off the existing UI when it's not in use. Now if you approach Mpc and press space, it's showing up. Yep. And this ugly square is not, do not care about it, worry about it for now. It's not important. And if you click space again, it's going to ask for your input. So now what's interesting is that if you click space once again, and you can see under here in the console there's actually an error message, dialog exception. This is just a way Yarn does to help you debug your game. Now you can see the text is overflowing because I don't have anything to size the square, size the button. When you are actually making a game, be sure to add that in as well. And now we just click what you're doing, just vibing. See ya. Okay, now let's. So you can also by default these dialogues will can be run again. So if you go back and say, yeah, same thing happens. Now if you go back to the Yarn script we just wrote, I just wrote, it looks like this. There are two simple branches which I covered before. Not very useful, but I think it's useful in this way. And also I don't have access to the editor, so it works the same way though. So the first branch is what you're doing, which is one of the buttons, and the second button is hello back, which is the exact same thing we saw there. Yeah, and you can see how it corresponds to the workflow. Hello, and you choose this thing. It's going to go to the next node if you're using the double bracket, or it's going to show whatever is tabbed. So you add something, you add a indent in here, and it knows it's like Python if you are familiar with it. And same thing goes here. And once it's not indented anymore, it means branch ended. Now it's sequential again. Now Mpc says see ya, and see ya is exactly what saw in the game. Now, so that's a very basic setup for dialog, and it's pretty much everything. The next thing we'll cover is commands, which makes the game actually dynamic. Next up, we'll be covering commands. Commands is how you will have your Yarn script interact with the mono runtime or your mono behavior code. So the first thing is, let's look at how you write commands in there. Pretend this is a node. We have 3 nodes here, and everything that's quoted by this double angle bracket is a command. They are space separated strings. The first string is always the command's name, and everything else are arguments. Arguments will be fed in as a array of strings. And here you can see there is a command we'll be handling this first. Set pick mpc1. This is a name obviously, and this is the command. Now let's go back to the to the controller, because the controller is going to take care of it. So here I uncommented this handle set pick, which is going to be the callback for whatever is sent into it. Here string array of is called args, and I'm enforcing a arg list length, but you don't have to do it. If you don't, you're actually creating a method that has dynamic argument count. So here, if it's not 1, I'm just going to throw away unity exception. You can it'll be better if you create your own exception, but I'm just being lazy here. And also same thing. It has name, and if there's the name is not recognized, it's going to throw something. And we'll cover how to register the names later. And now PFP-box.sprite name to PFP name. So we'll put whoever has the name the PFP to the box. Now go to the top. I uncommented this PFP box, which is a reference to an image component. Also you need to include or using Unity engine.ui to use a image box, but this is an image box that's going to be containing the PFP. And here also we have a dictionary of names to PFP, which is called name to PFP. Pretty easy to understand. Now what's interesting is that in start, or actually whatever time point before the command is actually executed, do this. Runner, remember runner is the dialog runner object. Runner.add command handler setPick handle setPick. So first thing, setPick, what does it mean? It's going to tell the runner that whichever command that has a name or starts with setPick, which is exactly here, setPick, feed all of its arguments to handle setPick. Okay, what's interesting here is that you can actually route multiple commands to the same handler, and it's not going to be very useful, but just Yarn allows you to do it. And now that's what we need. Okay, let's go back to the Mpc, and here you see there's a PFP and a name. We're going to use those to register. Oh, also for the register, we'll need these actual arguments now. It has a name, it has a PFP, and we're going to use those to actually register them in. That's how you make sure the name to PFP actually contains stuff. And now go to Mpc Script. If you see here, there's these two are uncommented. So PFP and Mpc name, these are really settings. Use serialized fields to make life easier for the game designer. Now uncomment these. Register speaker and Mpc name and PFP. We're going to tell the text field instance we need to register this script, and also we want you to know this name is registered with this PFP. So when this Mpc is talking, they know what's happening. Now go back to the Mpc. It has to compile, okay, change things in the editor. Mpc, and you see here there's a Mpc name. I'm called Mpc1. Okay, this is very important. Mpc1 is going to be used as the name of the PFP, and remember we're going to feed the argument. We're going to use the argument as name to find the PFPs. So if you go here, you can see setPick Mpc1. So basically that's it's sad we don't have any way to statically check that, but just remember consistency. Make sure your script is consistent with your code. This is very important. I used to write something similar to Yarn before, and consistency is really one of the big things you want to make sure that to have, because it's very difficult for any workflow like this. You're writing some code outside Unity, and you're importing it in and work with C# with it. You need to manually check these consistencies. So now Mpc1 has the correct name, I suppose. Yes, and it needs a PFP. You don't want. Okay. If you don't want, you can use whatever picture you have. But me, I used Notepad to create these pretty PFPs, which are very intuitive. So it's Mpc1 head. Put that in. Also, you to create this thing, just drag whatever picture we have into Unity. It's going to create a spreadsheet like this. This is a single spreadsheet, by the way. And now if you click on Mpc1, also Mpc1 is a little green thing here, our green friend here, and it should have everything. And if you yeah, before we start playtesting, we actually need to add a couple of things in addition. So first, I do want to cover this. We just add the same thing here, handle set pick player pick. It's going to handle a different command. If you remember, it's set player pick. I'm doing this because usually the game only has one player. If you're going to make a online game, it's different, but for a normal single player game, you have one player. So I think it can be potentially be useful to actually set the player related information not on the player but actually on the controller. But also this is really optional. You can actually just make the player use the same thing as set pick and register itself with the name. But here we're using set player pick. Also, it covers a very interesting edge case. So you can see here, I'm also enforcing a zero argument syntax here. And I'm not checking for length here. I'm checking for no. This is because when there are no args, the arg option is not going to be like empty array. It's going to be no. There's nothing in there. And you don't want to check the length of no's. So make sure when you're checking for zero. Also, it means I should probably do something like this. Here, yeah, now it's like safer. And if everything's okay, it's going to just set PFP box to the player PFP. Now let's go back and we need a couple of settings. First, for Mpc, remember you need to update the dialog. You can update them in place or update it here. Use a separate dialog file and put name and PFP head in, and here you'll need to drag the PFP box in here. And also for player PFP, same thing we did with the Mpc. I'm just going to use this pretty player head here, which should work. Now if we go back and start the game, now if you talk to the Mpc, it says hello Mpc1, and if you greet, it's going to say player, what's up, and Mpc says see ya, player says see ya, and we're done. So that is how you use commands to actually allow writers or whoever is writing the Yarn dialog to interact or actually manipulate what's happening in the actual game. And with that concludes our tutorial on Yarnspinner. It's really just a very basic introduction to the thing, and with that you should be able to create something that's either a visual novel or something or a very simple dialogue system in your RPG game or maybe your side scroller. And it's not necessarily very simple. I'm just these are the simple features of it, and there are more of Yarnspinner. If you go to Yarnspinner's official website and click this button, it's going to take you to a tutorial which is exactly the documentation. You can see here are the interesting things we just covered here. The editor part, editor doesn't work here. You can use the downloaded version though, that should work. And nodes and content, we did talk about that. And controlling dialogue stuff, these are the important things to work with. And also expression and variables is where things get tricky. You can actually set and read variables either in memory or from disk to do more powerful things. Now these things I also mentioned, and there are I think the most juicy part is here. Syntax quick reference is going to cover everything that has special meaning or not special meaning in the Yarn syntax for the Yarn dialog runner. And API documentation has all the important APIs from Yarn. we exclusively worked with Yarn Unity, which are these functions or features are encapsulated in Unity components. And yeah, with that, this is all of our tutorial. Hopefully you can start from here and learn more about Yarnspinner by either working on stuff or watching different videos, or just reading their documentation. Totally feel free to experiment with different usages. This is only my design and I've only just learned it, and I'm just using my own inertia of designing systems inside games. You don't necessarily have to follow that. Try with your own way of doing that. Find your own best practices. And yeah, see ya.